Viltrox releases its first lab series lens today, the 135mm F1.8. I've been lucky to get my hands on one quickly, and I directly noticed the weight, which is 1300 gram including sunhood. So the question is really, why would you get this lens over something like the 135mm G Master, which I will compare it to today. But before we do that, before we get into the lab, let's first capture some actual footage with this lens so you can see what it's capable of. I already have a pretty cute idea of what we can shoot with it. We're at Chonburi Zoo today. As you can see, there are quite a lot of people here because there's a little hippo here called Mu Dang, which is pretty famous on social media. So I hope we can see it fast enough, because you see lots of people here. We got up at 4:30 a.m. today, but still arrived here pretty late. So I hope we won't have to wait too long. I think the Viltrox lens should get us close enough to get some good shots of that hippo. Hey hippo. Oh shit, that means another waiting time. It's tough to get a shot. Anyway, let's talk about the body of this lens. And I mentioned the weight already, which is definitely a downer for me because I travel a lot, but it can also be an advantage. At first, obviously, this lens is really well built, it feels solid, all metal. Even the sunhood has a rubber on the edge like the G Master had, so Viltrox put a lot of effort into making the body as good as possible, especially if you're a freelancer or so, if you shoot a lot for clients that might care about you having a heavy, professional, big-looking setup in your hand, then that can also be an advantage. Of course, that is stupid, I know, but many clients don't know better, so in that regards it can also be an advantage. And talking about the features of the body, you get two programmable buttons. You also get a declickable aperture ring, which you can also freely program. And what directly jumps into your eye on this lens is that you have a little display on top, which shows you the distance to your subject and also the aperture, which is important here because the apertures are not written on the lens itself, which I don't like that much. I prefer it written down like it is on the G Master lenses, because then it's always the same position for the same aperture. But I do understand that many people might actually prefer the programmable function. Oh, the gibbons are going crazy here. And another pretty unique feature, which you don't directly see on this lens, is that it actually connects via Bluetooth to your smartphone. And that allows you, for example, to set focus points so that you can automatically rack focus between 2 points on button press. Just a feature that I think every camera should have by now. It's 2024, but because camera manufacturers don't put it into their bodies yet, it seems like lens manufacturers have to do so. So it's great that Viltrox does that. And aside from that, the app also works to program all your buttons and the aperture ring and all of that stuff. So great body overall. I just wish that we would have an aperture ring exactly like Sony. But again, I think most people would actually prefer the programming function. So great job with the body. Let's shoot a bit more and come to the actual tests. Am I allowed to post that on YouTube?
Anymore?
I'm not sure. They are naked. quite rainy, I have to go back now, but I'm also not big on zoos, to be honest. I prefer filming animals in the wild, but well, can't get it always as you want to, right? So let's get back and talk more about the lens and all the lab tests. What do you think of this lens?
Man, this lens is pretty beast. I think this is a dream lens, especially for me. Like I'm a wedding photographer, then I think it's a good deal for like pre-wedding shoots.
So back home in Chiang Mai, let's talk about sharpness. I tested the Viltrox 135mm lens against the Sony 135mm f1.8 G Master, and I can only say I'm impressed. I tested both lenses on the A7C Mark II, which I'm also shooting on right now. It has a 33 megapixel sensor, and looking at the Viltrox lens, it's already super sharp at f1.8 in the center, and the corners are pretty sharp too. In the corners it gets a little sharper at f2.8, but after that I also can't notice any significant difference, so it's already pretty sharp, quite open. But now is the question, how does it compare to the Sony? And I must say, I couldn't believe my eyes. I actually tested it twice to make sure, but the Viltrox appears sharper to me, even when comparing at f1.8 on the Viltrox to f5.6 or f8 on the Sony, and that goes for both the center and the corners. And yes, this was in Lightroom with all corrections turned off and sharpening set to 0. So when it comes to sharpness and also contrast, it really doesn't get much better than the Viltrox, and actually surprised me because the 135mm G Master is already supposed to be one of the sharpest lenses out there, but this one definitely tops it. So much about sharpness, let's talk about vignetting. The Viltrox shows a bit of vignetting at f1.8, but it's not bad at all, and by f2.8 it's already gone. The Sony, on the other hand, has a darker vignette at f1.8, which also disappeared at f2.8. So while the Viltrox does perform slightly better here, the difference is so minor that I wouldn't base my decision on this alone. Next up is chromatic aberrations. The Sony shows a bit of green and magenta fringing when you zoom into 300%, but this cleans up by f4. The Viltrox has a barely noticeable blue edge, and at f1.8 the foreground appears slightly cooler than the background, but both issues disappear by f2.8, where everything looks perfect to me. So again, I would give the edge to the Viltrox here, but honestly you would only notice these differences if you're zooming in a lot, so they are not a big deal for either lens. They are both excellent. And moving on to colors quickly, both lenses are actually very consistent, but the Viltrox does appear to be slightly warmer, especially in neutral tones. It's really hard to notice though. So I would say if you're using both lenses on the same camera, the difference is so neglectable that you wouldn't really have issues matching those lenses in post, and they will generally give you a pretty neutral look, so you won't have any problems color grading those lenses. Anyway, let's come to something that you're probably a bit more interested in now, and that's the autofocus. So let's do the standard autofocusing test first. Does it track me well or not? I would wonder if not, to be honest, because Viltrox lenses generally perform good when it comes to autofocus, so I assume it will be the same here. But I also did something special with this lens. I filmed my friend Mansky while he was flying the DJI Avata 2 drone pretty fast towards me with this lens, and also with the Sony A9 Mark III in 120 frames per second. That's also the camera that I'm using right now. And 120 frames per second is pretty challenging, especially for a third-party lens, but it tracked it perfectly fine. Of course, it was not that the focus was always on the drone. I also had situations where it lost focus, but that's always the case. I never had a camera and lens combination where that didn't happen. Also with birds and stuff, it's always the same. It always has to require focus once, and then it can start tracking it. But as you can see in the shot here, after I had focus, it tracked it perfectly while it was flying pretty fast towards me, and that in 120 frames per second. So that already told me that the focus of this lens is actually pretty good. Let's do one more. Is it fast? Oh, that was pretty much perfect. Okay, so I think focusing on this lens, you won't have any issues, but of course I also think you don't get the 120 raw photos per second on the A9 Mark III as you would get with native Sony lenses. That's definitely a little bit of a downside. And that also leads me to another little issue with this lens, which is focus breathing. This lens has quite a bit of focus breathing. It is pretty noticeable. So if that's an issue for you, if you want to do lots of big focus pulls in your videos, for example, then you might want to look into the G Master, because that gives you a focus breathing correction in camera, which crops a bit in and compensates for the focus breathing. You don't get that with the Viltrox lens because it's a third-party lens, and Sony doesn't allow that feature for third-party lenses, unfortunately. It's not a deal breaker in my opinion, but something to be aware of if you shoot lots of videos with this lens. And there's also the out of focus part, the Bokeh. And here the Viltrox lens has 11 aperture blades, which produce really nice round Bokeh balls in the center. Towards the edges they become cat-eyed shape, but that's to be expected. And the Bokeh balls overall also look really smooth with no noticeable onion rings, unless you crop in a lot. And there are also no distracting patterns. The overall bokeh and the transition into the focus areas also look great and really smooth, and you actually get a lot of it. I mean, let's be real, you get a lens like this because you want bokeh, and this lens delivers. And that's also what I really love about this lens. The in-focus areas are super sharp, as we've seen before, while the autofocus areas are really nice and smooth, and that actually makes it really hard not to get good-looking shots with this lens. Next up is flaring, and there the Viltrox does show some flaring when shooting directly into a light source, but it's quite smooth and adds a nice touch in my opinion. It's definitely not distracting at all, it's most important. But I did notice one thing when using this lens hood, and that's if a light source is slightly to the side out of frame, you might see some shading from the hood. So in such cases, it's better to take the lens hood off for even light distribution. But also, if you're using an ND filter, you probably won't have the lens hood on anyway, so this shouldn't be an actual issue under practical use cases most of the time. So my initial question was, why would you choose this lens over the G Master despite its heavier weight? And after using it for about 2 months, I do get it. I mean, obviously, the sharpness is incredible together with the bokeh you get. It's a joy to use and look at the footage it produces. But realistically, I travel a lot, and considering even my Sony 70-200 2.8 Mark II weighs about 200 gram less, I probably won't use it that much. That said, whenever weight isn't an issue, I do definitely prefer the Viltrox. It's also a fantastic choice for wedding photographers. My friend Mansky, who shoots weddings occasionally, tried it, and he immediately said he would love to use it for that. And I also want to use this lens for snake photography, which usually happens in the dark, so the 1.8 aperture comes in handy. And I don't want to be too close to snakes for obvious reasons. So there are definitely quite a few use cases where you might want to look into this lens, especially considering that you get slightly better than G Master quality for only about $900. Oh, and don't forget to grab some ND filters for this lens. To find the best ones, check out this video here where I compare the top options on the market right now.